At the risk of offending my hosts, I'm going to say that I think the only people who are experts on disability are people who have disability. I've worked in the area for 30 years, and Lindsay McMillan I've known for all of those years. I would say I've got far more still to learn about disability than I know at the moment. Okay, let's get down to some hard facts about what the NDIS actually looks for. Can I, before doing that though, just say something which a lot of people don't understand, and that is that we are coming from a system, the current system, across Australia, which is profoundly, irreparably broken, absolutely unfixable. No Australian state or territory, has got the fiscal resources sufficient to meet even the most basic ongoing care of its populations with a disability. So if we don't put the National Disability Insurance Scheme in place, we are, to use a highly technical term, stuffed. Really, really seriously stuffed. There is no plan B as far as I know. The various costs of administering disability services of any sort of standard into the future have been put at around in 20 years' time, at around $45 billion per annum using the current system. Now the NDIS, when it reaches maturity, will be about half that in cost. And because it's administered by a national authority, it's an Australian statutory authority, the fiscal base which resides in the Australian government will be sufficient for its purposes. Now, having said that, the states and territories are putting in a lot of money as well, but I don't want to get too technical about who's paying for what, because it gets boring. Okay, let's have a quick look at it. It's a single system, really, really important. So whether you're in Kununurra or you're in Hobart or wherever you might live, it should be the same for you at the end of the day in terms of the quality of the support that you will be entitled to. No entitlement at the moment. This will be an entitlement scheme if you are eligible. It will be administered by the National Disability Insurance Agency, and its benefits will be lifelong. At the moment, if you have a disability and you are lucky enough to get supports, the horizon for that is likely to be the next budget in your state, and that's the extent of the security that you enjoy. Okay, the matter that Marianne asked me to ensure that I covered is the question of eligibility. And you're supposed to laugh at that, isn't it? Yeah. It's a little bit complex. Can I say that if anybody is interested in this matter, please contact Marianne, and I'm sure she will be happy to email you a copy of this presentation. So it does mean you can have a look at it later if you want to, including the bit about eligibility that I'm just going to cover. Let's first of all have a think about Australia and its population. Because this is an insurance scheme, in a sense, it works for us all. Whether you've got a disability or not, the fact remains you could acquire one. And because it is an insurance scheme, and it uses the basic principles of insurance, i.e. a premium income, which creates a pool which is used to meet the needs of people who suffer the consequences of whatever it is that's being insured against. Because that exists, the NDIS is for everybody, including all of you sitting in this room and me and all of the people outside. So to that extent, these people are what the Productivity Commission called Tier 3. So it's your insurance policy, it's in your back pocket. But there's also a very large number of people who have significant disabilities. The number of people in Australia with disabilities is about 1.27 million. And I'm not talking about people with hearing loss or a bit of fading eyesight. And I don't mean to be rude to people who've got hearing loss or fading eyesight. but I'm talking about reasonably significant disability. In fact, there are 700,000 people in Australia with very significant disabilities. By very significant, I mean that they need assistance most days to either communicate or get about, i.e. mobility, or they will need assistance with things that we take for granted as everyday activities. Getting out of bed, bathing, being able to prepare a meal and eat it, going to the toilet, those sorts of things. 700,000. Now, of that 700,000, it is variously projected between 410 and 460,000 will be eligible for the support that the NDIS will give. So here's the arithmetic. 700,000 minus somewhere between 410 and 460,000 means you've got about 250,000 people with significant disabilities who are not going to get into the NDIS. I'm not going to cover this in great detail. You can have a look at it later if you've got the will and you have a serious insomnia problem. The key points are these. It will only apply to people under 65 years of age, or at least. If you are under 65 when you acquire your disability or become eligible for the scheme, you will be able to continue with your supports after you're 65. But if you acquire your disabilities after you're 65, then you are going to get looked after, I use the term loosely, by the aged care system. So if you're like me, I'm knocking on the doors of 70 and I'm a bit anxious about whether my kids are going to look after me or not, because I don't think anybody else is going to. The main problems as defined by the eligibility criteria that will be addressed, not the main problems, the main areas that will be covered relate to function. Now, I'm saying this deliberately because I know there will be lots of people with medical degrees in the room. This is not in any way a medical scenario. This is about the ability of people to do things, which will maybe be a byproduct of their medical diagnosis. So if a person cannot easily get about, mobility, cannot easily communicate, maybe for reasons of a severe communication impairment, or maybe for reasons of a cognitive impairment, a permanent brain injury, whatever it might be, then they should get picked up. And people who lack that ability to look after themselves. Now that last one is most important because that's going to pick up people with mental health issues, and it will pick up people, for example, people who are on the autism spectrum somewhere. But it's a question of degree. And again, it's going to be really, really difficult because I know a lot of people who are on the autism spectrum who present very well and who have no capacity at all to really look after themselves. So this is going to be a test, I think, of the NDIS. Its ability to drill down and really understand a person and their needs and not just take the superficial diagnosis that might be convenient. Mental health, I think, is going to be particularly challenging because there are many people who have mental health conditions who are going to deny that and who are going to fail to recognise when they are in or about to enter an episode, and who will not seek the assistance of the NDIS, but it's actually a requirement that they do so. So that becomes a really good-looking catch-22. The other thing that I wanted to just cover very briefly is the fact that there is an early intervention component. Now, when we talk about insurance, insurance runs on principles of efficiency. Very, very simple. It's all about cost. The people who run the NDIS are not going to be bleeding heart well-wishers. They are going to be hard-nosed actuaries. They're not, in all likelihood, going to know a great deal about disability. Doesn't matter. What they are interested in are the numbers. How big is the pool? What are the risk calibrations, and will the pool and its size be sufficient to meet the needs of the number of people who are covered by this insurance policy? That's what they're going to be interested in. So one of the key differences of the future from the past is going to be about early intervention. Early intervention has been spoken of for years, and we've known for, since Moses was running around, that if you've got a child, for example, with spasticity, and you can apply the relevant therapies early enough in life, in sufficient measure, you are going to, as likely as not, have a significant and beneficial impact on that child as that child grows, and enhance considerably that child's opportunities in later life to live as normal a life as possible, to gain employment, to enjoy what is available in the community. So early intervention is really, really important, because if you can apply resources early to a person, I was about to say a child, but of course early intervention could apply, for example, to a person in their 30s who's just been diagnosed with MS or MND or something. But early intervention will be about reducing later cost. So spend $500,000 now, but potentially save 2-3 million down the track. Important statistic for you to know, attendant care is valued at about $39 an hour, roughly, at the moment. The way the NDIS will see that is about $500,000, because that is what 1 hour of attendant care is likely to be worth over the average lifetime of a participant in the scheme. So that is the way the NDIS sees things. They will fight over every hour, because for them there's 5 noughts after the 5. I hope I got that number right. Might only be $250,000. Don't know. Somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. Who's counting? Yes. Okay, so early intervention is important. Okay, so now we're coming on to your area. What will happen? How will it actually play out? Well, a person with a disability will knock on the door of the NDIS, and they will say welcome, and they will undergo an assessment process which will have a look at those eligibility criteria that I've just covered there. And if they are found to be eligible, they will get a package. Importantly, the package will not represent any capped amount or anything like that. It will be based on the needs of that person. And if the needs of that person happen to come to $47,923.17, that is the amount that will be allocated. And somebody else who in a number of respects might appear very similar to our person who's got $47,900 and whatever dollars it was and 17 cents, may get more or less, because it will depend upon that person, how they present, in other words, their presenting needs, but also be based upon their aspirations for the sort of life that they want to live. They will be able to choose their service provider. That's really important and long, long, long overdue. So the days of powerful service providers saying what shape the hole was and you had to slip yourself into that hole, they're gone. Service providers now have got to make sure they're meeting your needs, because if they don't, you as a customer have your gold in your pocket and you will be able to walk. Just about any sort of support that you can think of, and probably lots that you can't, that people might need, are likely to be fundable. The great majority will be. I'm very sanguine about this. I've never yet encountered an ability over 30 years that wouldn't be covered by this scheme. It even goes to things like the modification of homes where, for example, a child is diagnosed with something that's going to change the arrangements or need to change the arrangements of that household. So the dollars that are involved can be quite substantial. This bit, though, is important, this term, reasonable and necessary, because that is what the NDIA is going to say. That's going to be one of the critical things that will determine the size of the package you get. There are a number of things. One is reasonableness. Is it a reasonable request? Another one will be, does it represent value for money as judged by a reasonable person? But this is the key one. This is the doozy. This is the king of the heap. Fair and necessary. Sorry, reasonable and necessary. And I say it's a doozy because what is reasonable and necessary for me, in my opinion, may not be reasonable and necessary in the opinion of the person who's making assessments about me. So there's these two young men. Let's fast forward them 15 years to the NDIS, and they both walk in the door. One can get a job. Now, it's not the role of the NDIS to find them jobs, but it's still a good analogy in its own way. One is going to be a very, very low-cost support option. Oh yes, that's definitely reasonable and necessary. We'll go for that. The other one, isn't it reasonable? Is it necessary that you would have to invest tens of thousands of dollars in him over an extended period to bring his skills up to the level that would be required for him to be able to hold down an office job? Now, people have got to make those sorts of judgments, and they've got to be consistent whether they're made in Cairns or Perth or Redfern or, Launceston. Doesn't matter. So I think this term, reasonable and necessary, has got a few whiskers attached on it. Let's just have a quick look at the dollars. At the moment, we spend $1.6 billion. It's a lot of money, isn't it? $1.6 billion in Victoria on disability support services, and the truth is it's nowhere near enough. Most people with disabilities lack what they need. There are many people who've got nearly adequate packages, but there are equally lots of people who've got nothing at all because the amount of money is defined and capped. It's defined by the budget and it's capped by the budget. The NDIS will change all that. What's happening is that in Victoria, under a signed agreement, a bilateral agreement, so nobody can walk away from this easily, the Commonwealth will put in 2.6 billion and Victoria will put in 2.5 billion. So our 1.65 goes up to, what does it go up to? 5.1 billion. That's a humongous increase, and that should be the difference in people's lives, the quality difference that we need to get. Productivity Commission said if we were operating with our employment of people with disabilities at the average of the OECD, not even the top performers, just the average, we would derive an immediate $7 billion benefit of cost sliced off the NDIS. The program that we've got in Barwon, it's not 5,000 people in there at the moment. In fact, it's a fraction of that. The 5,000 people are being phased in, and the first cab off the rank was ECIS, Early Childhood Intervention Services, and people who, this is really good, people who hadn't had a package but were eligible to get one. So people who'd previously had nothing, they were the first cabs off the rank, and I thought that was really, really good. And the intention is that the NDIS will start to be available for the population outside of Barwon from 2016 and with scheduled completion by 2019. And the task force that I chair is will provide advice to the Victorian government on how that might play out. Not that we've got any power for that, but if we can persuade the Victorian government about our opinions, then that is what they will take to the negotiating table as these things are rolled out. Now I think the intention is the packages are annual, reviewable annually, but can be more frequent if a party requests. But the entitlement is lifelong. The entitlement. But the package will need to vary according to a person's needs at a point in time, and particularly to respond to the major life transitions, you know, going from primary school to high school, leaving school, getting a job, leaving home, living in a place of your own, retiring, all of those big transition points. Okay, service providers. Service providers is really different. I've referred to service providers before and have said that they're going to have to change their game. They can't say take it or leave it anymore, because people will say, well, thanks very much, I'll leave it. I'll go somewhere else. And that's as it should be. So service providers are going to have to get commercially savvy in order to prosper in this game. And the business model is going to change. In the past, it used to be, I'm sorry if I'm messing up your thing here, governments provided the money directly to service providers that provided the services on behalf of government. I sensed it might be a little bit like what your treasurer was telling you happens because you get lots of grants and you have to deliver outcomes on that. Well, that was the game here. But in the future, the money is going to go from the Australian government directly to people with disabilities in their packages, and they will negotiate with the provider. Now, the difference is, up here, maybe it was true that the funding was lousy, and it was, but hey, you knew what it was and you got it in advance. Down here, the funding's still lousy and you don't know whether you're going to get it, and you're going to get it in arrears. So that's really going to have to wake up the service providers. If they don't get smart on this, they are going to go under. Innovation. I think innovation is really, really important in this scheme. It's got to work. It's got to work by having people look at finding new ways of doing things, and if they don't, what's the definition of insanity? Isn't was it Einstein or Freud? Yeah, so you put in the same resources and you expect a different result. Well, you know, innovation is going to come about through that situation I was talking about before. You didn't sharpen the, or I didn't sharpen the pencil, I didn't get the work. So I'm going to innovate, hopefully, or I'm going to go out of business. Focuses the mind, doesn't it, when you know you're going to go out of business? Now, this one's really important. Here's the sleeper. I heard it said earlier in your AGM about this is an area with a very large ageing population. And ageing people, I know I'm nearly there, they are going to need support as they age, carers. So we are an ageing population, and very, very large numbers of aged people are going to require paid supports to do things that historically have been done for nothing by families. The last of the great generations of care, unpaid, informal caregivers are the baby boomers. And, you know, the first of the baby boomers, I was in that very first cohort, they are now approaching 70. So the people they were caring for are at the stage of dying, but they are not going to be cared for themselves in the same way that they regarded as a moral imperative almost. They just saw it as a duty. It was something that one does. But the young people today, that's not the case. I've got half a dozen children and I'm not putting money on any one of them looking after their old man. And the situation is that at the same time that informal caregiving is reducing, the demand is going to grow because of the NDIS, which is going to roughly double the number of caregivers that are required, at the same time as the Aged Care Secretary is saying, hands off, we want these people, we want them. So where are they all going to come from? So what's the bottom line? If I'm a person with a disability and I don't get what I want, I'm going to say, fare thee well. The gold's jangling in my pocket, I'm going to walk and I'm going to find somebody else. And if you lose your customers, you're going to lose your income, because it's not going to be government grants anymore. And if you lose your income, you're not going to be able to pay your staff. So where are they going to go? They're going to go to somebody who can pay them. And they will be the successful agencies that do innovate, do keep a very sharp pencil, and provide the services that people with disabilities want. Well, Tier 2 services are actually delivered by the state through, so it's the way the Department of Health operates, the Department of Education, Transport, Justice, etc. It's for example, having buses that are genuinely accessible for people, particularly if they happen to live in Pakenham and want to get to Dandenong. It's a health system where a person with a significant disability, let's say a moderate intellectual disability, I was talking about this to a colleague earlier, goes into a doctor's surgery but is unable to articulate what their symptoms are. The doctor can't say, now, nice to see you, John, what's up with you? Because John's not going to understand the question and will not be able to articulate what's wrong. John may not even be aware that there is something wrong. So the health system's got to work well in that regard. The justice system, our prisons are full of people with intellectual disabilities and acquired cognitive impairments, full of them. I mean, it's an absolute, don't get me wound up on that one, it just appalls me. But so these various organs of the state, these government departments, they've all got to work well, they've got to work smarter, they've got to join up the dots between each other so that they can meet these basic and reasonable needs of people with disabilities who are in the general population. But there would be no reason why groups of professionals in the health or allied health areas couldn't get together, or indeed they could work individually, and seek to provide a part of the service that a person with a disability might need and which would be available through their package. However, and this however is a huge one, the NDIS will not pay for anything where there is a medical tag attributable to it. So a person with a disability presents with cerebral palsy, let's say. The cerebral palsy is a medical condition and there are costs that are attached to that. Maybe there might be drugs that they have to have regularly or what have you. But the condition itself disables them in terms of how they live their life. The NDIS will pay for the latter to provide the supports that compensate for that disabling condition. But the health system will have to continue to pay for whatever the health costs are. So in setting up a business model that was meeting or seeking to meet the needs of this market, you'd have to be very, very careful that you had a clear demarcation between the medical and the disabled side of the business model. That's another excellent question. Families cannot be funded under the NDIS. However, if in order for a person to receive the informal supports, in other words, the supports of the family, in an ongoing and sustainable way, that family needs time out, then the candidate, the participant in the scheme, will receive in his or her package funding for respite, which is actually aimed at assisting the family. The government is smart enough to recognise, and somebody over here said, I think it was you, we're going to continue to need informal care. The government knows that. If it has to pay all of the bills for all the care that's given, it'll go bankrupt. So it's absolutely in the government's interest and the NDIA's interest to fund respite and other family supports in order to keep that family engaged and keep them doing what they're doing and doing it well. Because if the family's doing it well, the NDIA won't have to bring in paid outsiders to do it in their stead. where people with disabilities often need quite sustained supports over a long period, and then they're withdrawn slowly. So at the moment there's a very poor synchronisation between the National Disability Insurance Scheme and DUA operating its programs. Now the reason I love the question is because the Productivity Commission in its report pointed out that if the scheme operates properly, it's a zero-sum game. It's not a $22.2 million sunk liability. It's $22.2 million to operate and $22.2 million worth of gains through everything else working properly. And a major part of that would be getting people with disabilities off income support and into employment. And is there room to do that? Absolutely there is. In Australia we are very, very poor internationally, really poor. We are something like 24th on a scale of 29 in the OECD.